Okay, let me see what kind of, wait a minute. Ah, there you all are. Yay. All right, well, welcome everyone. This is certainly a night of storytelling. I've been listening to two storytellers with microphones, etc. And now I've come here to our storytelling, to a wonderful evening of imagination and spooky things and all of that. And as I said, I found my sign. This sign was made maybe 15 years ago. Tailspinners, tell or listen, Orinda Library, the fourth Thursday. Yay, yay. And we'll be back there again, I'm sure. And I've already made sure that they're going to save us a place when it's time to return. So let us start tonight.
Just think, the longer you keep it up there, the less stupid television you can watch. You're protecting yourself.
So let's start tonight's wonderful, wonderful program with our feature teller, Jean Ellison. Jean had been telling stories all her life. She had a wonderful childhood with farm animals and horses and all that kind of stuff. And then when she went to the Dominican University storytelling program and got her certificate of that, she became really serious about storytelling and has had a wonderful adventure going to schools, going to festivals, going to libraries. And she's a storyteller at the Asian Art Museum. And what I think is interesting is that she hosted her first ever celebration in Fiji with 2 participants. And that was when she was in the Peace Corps. So tonight she's come with her very spooky stories. So don't be too afraid. It's all make-believe, you know. So let's welcome Jean Ellison.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take my hat off. Hats off to all of us.
While Jean's doing that, would everyone please mute yourself?
To mute or not to mute, couldn't we do that with our television sets right now? The story I want to share tonight, I first heard from storyteller Sandra McLeese. I was at a little festival up in Point Reyes Station. And when she told this story, I thought, I was just a brand new storyteller. I couldn't wait to talk to her afterwards. And where did you find that story? I love that story. And she told me it's called The Charcoal Cruncher. And it's from a book by Bierholst, The Monkey's Haircut and Other Tales of the Mayans. So this story comes from the Mayan people. And my sister and I were able, I have a Guatemalan tapestry behind me just to kind of set the mood. My sister and I were traveling in Guatemala many, many years ago, and we were fortunate to be able to stay at the Jungle Lodge in Tikal. And Tikal is a place, if you've never been there, I would put it on your bucket list. It is such a spiritual place. We had the whole day to explore. We saw the leafcutter ants building freeways across the pathways. And we got out into this grassy place where there was these enormous temples. And my sister and I walked up to the Jaguar temple, the Hawar temple. And she said, "Are you going to climb it, Jean?" And I said, "I don't think so. I'm afraid of heights, actually." And I said, "How about you, Valerie?" "No way. I'm just going to go over here for a while." I stayed behind at the Hawar temple and just took it in. It was a very steep incline. No ropes, no ladders, no handrails, very narrow steps. And as I stood there and looked at it, I saw people going up and people coming down. And I thought, well, if I could just go a few steps, I could say I climbed the temple. I climbed that big temple in Tikal. So I took my first few steps, kind of like climbing a ladder, actually, because the stairs aren't too very far apart, and up I went. And it wasn't so hard. I mean, it was kind of like climbing a ladder. And then I heard a voice, Jeannie. And I looked down, and there was my sister, and she was only that big. I thought, oh no, I've gone too far. But going down looked scarier than going up. So I kept going up. Ooh, I got to the top. And there I searched the skies for Superman. Where's Superman when you need him? There was no Superman. There was no elevator. The only way to get down was to go back down the way I came up, and I was terrified. So I solicited the help of a young college student. She looked confident, and I said, would you please be my role model? I really am so terrified of going down these steps, and I just need to have somebody to accompany me. Is that possible? She said, sure, come on. So she was great. We just traversed like you would go down a steep slope on skis. We just traversed back and forth until we got to the bottom. And was my sister surprised that I had gotten all the way to the top? I was so scared when I got to the top. I had my camera. I took no pictures. I was too scared. So I survived the Hawar Temple. Our adventures took us to many wonderful archaeological sites. This was an amazing place where thousands of people lived and prospered and were artistic and were mathematicians and builders, and it was awesome. And at night, we went to the lodge for our supper, and we had arranged to have a cottage where we would spend the night. And supper was fine, and we'd been alerted that the generators would close down at a certain time. So we had flashlights, torches, so we could get back to our little cottage. Dinner was fine. There was a table full of people from all over the world, which was fun. And then dinner was over, and people were just chatting and sharing their stories of the day. And then my sister, God love her, said, my sister's a storyteller. Why don't you tell us a story, Jean? Whoa, talk about putting put on the spot. So this is the story I told, with thanks to Sandra McLeese. His mother told him not to marry her. But sons do not always listen to their mothers now, do they? No. Things were fine to begin with, but one night when he reached his arm across the bed to touch his wife, he felt her shoulder, but there was no head. Her head was gone. And then he heard a horrible sound coming from the living area. That head had detached from the neck and had rolled out into the living area where there was the fire pit. And she was in the fire pit crunching on large, red, hot charcoals. Well, of course, he was freaked out. He went back to bed, covered his head, and held his breath. And sooner or later, she came rolling back and bounced a bit to get some height to get back up onto bed. And she reattached herself to her neck, and there she slept. He didn't sleep much that night. But the problem was happening every night after that. She would detach her head from her neck, and she would roll her head to the edge of the bed and down on the floor and roll out to the fire pit and start munching and crunching on charcoal. The hotter, the better. She really didn't like the cooled off stuff. If there was no charcoal that was appetizing enough for her, she would go to the neighbors' homes and terrorize them. Well, it got so bad that he had to admit to his mother that maybe she was right. Maybe he shouldn't have married her, and explained what was going on. And so she told him about a woman in the village who knew spells and things and sent him there to have a consultation. And that old lady said, oh, what you need to do is when she exits her body, so to speak, just put lots of salt around her neck, and when she comes back, she won't be able to attach herself again, and you might be rid of her. Well, good luck. And so he did just exactly as he was told. And that night, her head left her body and went out into the living room and was chunking on charcoal, crunching on charcoal. And he got the salt and he smothered salt all around her neck. And when she came back, she bounced until she could roll over to attach herself back to her neck. But when she tried to, she'd slip off. Her head would slip off. She tried it repeatedly. Her head kept slipping off. Then she rolled over and attached herself to his shoulder. There he was. He had two heads, his and hers, and she wasn't happy. Neither was he. Oh no, what am I going to do now? All the fits and screaming and yelling and accusations. The next day, he said, I think we need some fresh air. Let's go for a walk in the forest, shall we? And she said, okay. So off into the forest they went. He and her together in one body. Here, look at the lovely fruit up there in the tree. Darling, would you care for some nice fruit from the top of the tree where, I couldn't possibly climb that tree with you on my shoulder. It wouldn't be safe for you. So we're going to have to figure out how to dismount, and maybe you could just wait quietly here for me and I'll climb the tree and I'll send fruit down for you. Is that okay? All right. So up the tree he went, and up and up and up until he got to a place where there was bountiful fruit. And he threw one down at her, and then he just sat there. He was safe. She was looking up at him. When are you coming down? I need more fruit. There's no way I'm coming down. I'm through with you. I'm finished with you. Your history. Go away. Go roll away someplace and just never bother me again. I can't stand the sight of you. Well, that made her mad. And she started to bounce. And she bounced. And with every bounce, she bounced higher and higher and higher. And she was coming up, up, up into the branches of the tree toward his feet. But at one point, she got up very, very high. And when she went down for her final ascent, she landed on the shoulders of a passing deer. And she and the deer romped off through the bushes, over the bushes, and it disappeared. And it disappeared. And so far as I know, It was never seen again. Now that's the story of the charcoal cruncher. That's the story I told in the Patan, in the jungle lodge, just as the generators were crumbling and munching and creaking down, and pretty soon we were engulfed in complete silence. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face if you didn't have your torch. Fortunately, we had our torches and we found our cottage, and it had been a long day and we were exhausted and fell asleep quickly. But in the middle of the night, I felt a hand on my back. And I thought, oh, Valerie, you're trying to freak me out. Okay, maybe that story spooked you and you're just trying to get back at me. Oh yeah, okay. And I looked over to where she was sleeping on the other side of the room. She was snoring loudly. It wasn't my sister. I'd like to think it was the benevolent spirit of that place that appreciated my story. The next morning, we sat with the same group of people that we had had dinner with the night before, and each and every one of them said they had had the strangest dreams that night. Thank you. Sleep well.
Ooh, what a wonderful spooky start to our evening. Thank you so much, Jean. Woo. I want to go. You made me want to go, but then I don't know.
Be prepared.
You better be prepared. I better have a good flashlight, that's for sure. Thank you so much. So nice to have you back. All right, so we have lots more great stories to come. And our next storyteller is Larry Kluger, but we all know him. I think we all, if you haven't heard him before, you're about to hear Larry at Larry. So take it away, Larry.
Okay, let me stand up and move back a little bit. Oh, okay, I think I'm okay. True story. The night was cold, and Josiah Wilbarger clearly realized the grim reality of his situation. He had no food or water, no clothing. Flies and maggots were at work on his bloody wounds, and there was no way he could make it back to his friend Reuben's home. Josiah knew the shade of the oak tree he lay under would shield him from the relentless Texas sun the next morning. But unless help arrived, another day in that Texas heat would finish him for sure. As he lay there, his thoughts drifted back 5 years to 1828. In 1828, Josiah traveled with his family 700 miles to Texas from Missouri. There was lots of free land in Texas. They settled along a peaceful stream, and their nearest neighbor was 75 miles away. This was such a great opportunity for Josiah's family. Of course, he would miss family and friends back in Missouri, especially his sister Margaret. They were so close as children, almost inseparable. Josiah recalled how once they were trapped on the roof of their house during a flood. Margaret was so scared, but Josiah kept reassuring her, have faith. Someone will come to help us before too long. And they did. As they grew older, they never lost that closeness. They'd never go more than a few days without seeing each other. It was hardest saying goodbye to Margaret. Those first 4 years in Texas were very lonely for Josiah. In 1832, a friend of his from Missouri, Reuben Hornsby, settled across the river from Josiah with his family. The two families visited each other often, and both their farms prospered. On one of those visits, in August of 1833, Reuben introduced a group of 4 men to Josiah who were interested in settling in Texas. Josiah agreed to show them around the countryside while Reuben remained at home. After several hours, while riding along Walnut Creek, they spotted a lone Indian and they signaled for him to stop. They wanted to talk with him. That Indian, seeing 5 armed white men, fled. They still wanted to talk with him, so they rode after him. But they lost his track at the headwaters of the creek, and the frustrated men turned back. Looking back on this, Josiah realized the Indian was probably suspicious and scared of the 5 armed white men. He may have even thought they wanted to hurt him. They should have considered that, but they felt their pursuit was innocent and they meant him no harm. When they stopped to rest, they tied up the horses, started preparing their lunch, and forgot all about their previous encounter with the Indian. Meanwhile, that Indian had gathered a number of tribesmen and stalked the white men to their camp. As they ate, the Indians attacked with arrows and gunfire. All 5 men ran for the cover of some nearby trees. First one man, then another went down injured, hit by gunfire. Josiah went to the aid of one, but was hit in the calf by an arrow. He loaded the man's rifle and returned to his own tree for cover. Within seconds, he was hit in the other calf by an arrow. The 2 uninjured men ran for their horses as Josiah fought on. Seeing the 2 men fleeing, Josiah ran after them. A rifle ball struck him in the back of the neck, emerging from the left side of his chin. Frightened and thinking that Josiah had been killed, the 2 uninjured men rode as hard as they could towards the safety of Reuben's home. Excited at their victory, the Indians fell on the white men to finish them off. They cut the throats of Josiah's 2 companions, but not his. Apparently, they thought his neck wound was fatal. They stripped the 3 men of their clothing and scalped them. Then they rode off with their captured horses, leaving their bloody victims behind. Josiah was not dead, though. He was temporarily paralyzed. He was conscious during his terrifying ordeal and fainted shortly after being scalped. When he regained consciousness, it was late afternoon. Josiah realized his only chance for survival was to make it back to Reuben's home, 6 miles away. So he started crawling. He crawled 600 yards before collapsing under an oak tree, unable to go 1 foot further. Night fell, dark and cold, and Josiah started thinking about everything that had led to this lonely end. His wandering thoughts were stopped abruptly and brought back to the present when he heard the sound of something or someone. "Brother Josiah," said a soft voice beside him, "you're too weak to go on your own. Remain here, and friends will come to help you before midday tomorrow." Josiah's eyes widened in surprise because there beside him was his sister Margaret, whom he thought was in Missouri. When she was sure that he understood what she said, she moved off in the direction of Reuben's home. Meanwhile, the 2 men who escaped made it back to Reuben's home with the tale of the attack. Both of them were certain that Josiah and the other 2 were dead. Reuben decided it was too late to retrieve the bodies. They would head back sometime the next day. That night proved to be troubling for Sarah Hornsby, Reuben's wife. She jumped up from a deep sleep, woke Reuben saying, "I dreamed of Josiah. He was naked, wounded, and scalped. I also saw Margaret, who said he was still alive, but needed our help very badly." "It was just a dream," said Josiah. "Let's go back," said Reuben. "Let's go back to sleep." The dream quickly returned, more vivid than before, and Sarah woke in a cold sweat. "I know Josiah is alive, and I know where he is." Reuben gathered his men and started off before daylight to find Josiah. They found him where Sarah said he would be, and in the exact condition she had described. They carried him back to Reuben's home, where he was nursed back to health. As soon as he was able, Josiah asked about his sister Margaret. To his surprise, no one had seen her. It was not for some time that the news came. Margaret had died in Missouri, 700 miles away, on the same day that Josiah was attacked. if not for the love of his sister who had reached beyond the gates of death, Josiah Wilbarger would have died that day in the wilds of Texas. As I said at the beginning, this is a true story. And at least some of them, I've seen several versions, but at least the main important parts are true. Josiah Wilbarger was leading a group around the countryside in Texas. They were attacked by Indians, and three of them, including Josiah, were injured. The other two were killed, but all of them were scalped. And Josiah did survive. I've seen drawings of him 8 to 9 years later with a severely scarred head. He was rescued. Now, whether Margaret was actually there and helped to save him is a different story. I like to believe that it's true. How about you?
Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome. Oh,
I was going to say
in the
there.
comment of the chat on the side, what I like is if people have any suggestions, what would make it better? Like if there was anything that was not clear, or if there's any way I might tell it better, or anything that might make the story better. I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Larry. If you want to give that kind of feedback to Larry, please send him a private chat. If you want to just tell any of the storytellers how much you like their story, you can send it to everyone. But that's how, let's do it that way. I was going to say that there's an expression, the tale is true as long as the telling lasts. I say it's true. Thank you, Larry. Our next storyteller is Bobby Kincaid, and she's going to tell us a story that is a folk tale, so it has a different kind of truth, right, Bobby?
Right. And I'm very fuzzy because I dropped my computer. And am I fuzzy to everybody else? Yeah.
Like a movie star, where they put the Vaseline on the calendar camera to make you look
You're
especially.
pleasantly diffused, yes.
Yeah,
All right. This is a Japanese story. It's, I don't know how old it is, but I told it at the gallery to children. And it's about the Shinto religion, which I love, and the Tories and the Komi. I hope I say these words right. I'm not a English speaker, let alone any other type of speaker. Anyway, it's about two sisters. One chooses the good honey way, and one chooses the greedy honey way. And this is how it goes. There was a sister who lived in Japan that loved the sparrows, and she had a special sparrow, and the sparrow would come down and she would feed it. And it loved her, and every day it showed up, and the other younger sister was a little bit jealous. Well, one day the older sister said, I'll go to the woods and I'll pick up some firewood, because the sisters made starch when they washed the gowns of the villagers, and then they would bring water and starch in and starch them up so that they were really nice, the komos, so that they looked beautiful. Well, this went on, and the sister was gone a long time, and the sparrow came, and it was very upset because it wanted to eat. Well, the younger sister threw her knife at it because she was jealous, and the knife came down and built her tub of starch all over. Well, when the older sister came back, she looked at the mess, and she looked at her sister, and she said, well, where's the sparrow? And she said, oh, that sparrow made too much noise, and I just cut its tongue out. And the older sister just said, you can't do that. That's not the way. That is not the way. So she said, I have to leave now. And she wrapped herself up, and she got her cane, and she started walking up the trail, which was getting steeper. And she came to the oxen cleaner, and she said, she bowed and she said, do you know where the sparrow lives? And he says, well, it's up the hill, but would you help me wash my ox here? And she says, oh, I would be glad to. So gently she sudsed it, and she rinsed him off, and she was careful with his eyes, and she washed his feet, and she could tell he was feeling really good. And the oxen washer said, well, thank you. Go right straight up the hill through the bamboo, and you'll see her. She's in a garden weaving. So The old grandma started, oh, it was a beautiful day. The sun was just right. The birds were chirping. The butterflies were out. The bees were humming. Oh, she had a delightful time. She came up, she walked up the hill, was very great, very easy to do. She got to the bamboo woods and very nice, all orderly. And she looked through them and she walked through, and there was a sparrow weaving in this beautiful garden. And she said, Sparrow, Sparrow. And the sparrow said, oh, hello, Grandma. She says, what are you doing here? She says, I want to apologize for my sister. She cut your tongue. She says, no, no, she didn't. She just got whatever. And she threw the knife at me and I left. I was going to come back, but come on in. Come on in. We'd love to have you. And she walked through this beautiful garden. She went into the parlor and they set her down. And they said, you must be hungry after your long trip. And they brought her some beautiful sushi and some gorgeous rice and green tea. And she had a delightful time. Well, it was getting a little late and a little dark. And the sparrow said to her, why don't you spend the night with us? And she said, oh, I should be getting back. But she said, the sparrow said, you don't want to get lost in the dark in the woods. Just spend the night with us. Well, she slept on silk sheets. It was so nice, and this lovely smell of the flowers outside. And in the night, she heard the chirping, and she looked out the windows, and the sparrows were dancing. And the sparrows are the kumi, and they're the birds of the spirits, and all the spirits and everything were dancing and having a good time. Well, in the morning, she woke up and she said, what a wonderful evening. And she saw the sparrows dance, and they all kind of chirped around. Well, they served her tea for breakfast and some of the best rice she's ever had. And they said, now, before you leave, we have a gift for you. And they brought out two baskets. And the old sister looked at him. She says, well, I'm pretty old. She says, I'll take that small one there. So they helped her put on her back and they wrapped her up. And she started out. Oh, it was beautiful, pleasant, butterflies, birds, trees were singing, and the ox cleaner said, thank you, old grandma. And she said, you're welcome. She got home, and the sparrow said she couldn't open that box till she got home. So she was obeying them. When she got home, her sister said, where have you been? I've been worried all night. I can't do anything without you. That wasn't fair of you. And she said, well, sister, I found the sparrow. I apologize. And they gave me this basket. I need to go inside to open it. But when she opened it up, it had a beautiful teapot. There were teas. There was some silver coins to spend. There was a bolt of silk. And the younger sister looked at that and her mind went completely greedy. And she says, where are those sparrows? And she said, well, older sister said, well, if you go there, you must apologize to them. You just can't. She says, where are they? She said, just go up the road and just keep climbing up the mountain. You'll find them. Well, she came to the ox cleaner, the old younger sister did. And the ox cleaner said, would you please clean my ox? Because he's the gateway into the coney. And she said, well, yeah, I guess I have time. Well, she splashed water and soap on it and didn't worry about the oxen's eyes and didn't worry about his feet. And she said, there, it's done. He said, thank you, old sister. But she wasn't listening. She just walked right up the hill. And as she walked up, rocks got in her way, roots grew in her way. The weeds stung her and made her scratch, and the sound was just hideous. She finally got to the the bamboo grove, and it was so tight she could hardly squeeze through. And when she squeezed through, there was the sparrow and a bunch of weeds weaving. And she said, Sparrow, I'm here to get my gift. And the sparrow said, no, take it easy. Take it easy. Why don't you come in and have some tea with us? Well, of course, they served her the worst weed tea she's ever had and the worst rice. And she looked at it and she smelled it. She said, no, I just came here. No. I came here for my gift. And the sparrows kind of danced around and chirped. And they said, okay, that's fine. So they brought out two baskets. One was tiny and one was very big. And she said, I'll take that big one. And she grabbed it up and she wrapped the thing around herself and she started on her way, not saying goodbye, not bowing, not apologizing, squeezed herself through the bamboo. And it was getting dark, and it started to rain, and the rocks got slippery and the roots tripped her. And she sat down on a grimy root. And she said, I'm going to open this box anyway. I'm not going to wait till I get home. Well, she opened it up and she saw these glittery eyes in there. So she reached in thinking it was going to be a dragon of some sort. And this thing got around her arm and spun on her arm, and the box flew open and these noises came out, and ghouls and ghosts and goblins chased her down the hill. She tripped, she screamed, she ran. She finally got home and she pounded on the door and she said, sister, let me in. And the sister said, not until you apologize to the sparrow. And she screamed and she hollered and she said, no. And then the older sister got very quiet, and the younger sister the sound was horrible and these things were chasing her around. And so finally she yelled, I apologize, sparrows. And it got very quiet and very nice. And the older sister opened the door and she said, you can come in now. Well, from then on, like all good stories, that younger sister fed the sparrows and was very quiet and trying to be as polite as she could. And so you've seen the honey way. There's the good honey way, and then there's the crude, awful honey way. And our lives will tell us which one we will have. And thank you very much for listening.
I hope all the storytellers, thank you, Bobby, are seeing the twinkling Zoom applause.
Yes.
And I'm an older sister, so I like that was, in that story, the older sister was
yeah, she won, huh?
a lot of European fairy tales, so I'll go for that. All right. We're so glad that Lance McVeigh is here to entertain us with his very special brand of storytelling, which is a poetic. And I want to say this ahead of time because almost every time, Lance, people will say after you tell, well, who wrote that? And the answer is Lance. Yes?
Okay. That's true. Yes, that is true. I will certainly let everybody know if I ever do anything that's somebody else's. Sorry I'm late. I got caught up in the debate, but I'm quite pleased to be away from it. So yeah, I'm going to try something new on you guys. I was looking to see if anybody heard this. I think Ed is the only one who's heard this, so that's good. This is brand new, and I'd like to test it out on you guys. Memorize. This is the first time I'm going to try to do it without using any crib sheets here. But I got to give you a little story behind the story on this because this one's a little nutty. So I'm in a rhymers group. You've met Ken Parsons from Newfoundland, and he's in a rhymers group that he pulled me into, and we have a great time every couple of weeks getting together. And through a strange series of events, we got challenged to write poems. I'm the only sort of storyteller in that group. Well, no, we're all good, but anyway, we were challenged to do a story about toenail fungus. Because who could make that interesting was kind of like nobody could make that interesting was kind of thing. And I'm like, oh no. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that, but I have to do it in sort of my style. So I got to make it kind of creepy and do it my way. And they were like, oh yes, please. So you have to know that this stems from the challenge of writing a story that makes toenail fungus interesting. Okay. With that said, this is the Ode to Mangus McGreen. Now, Mangus McGreen was old and mean and lived in a shack on a hill. He was surly and sore and had been in the war and had gun notches counting his kills. Now alone, he resigned to live on a dime as remote as he possibly could. He ran an old still, thus drinking his fill and not eating as well as he should. But at night, he'd rejoice in his bitter life choice, and he'd sit in his rocker and puff on an old wooden pipe with tobacco so ripe, life didn't seem so rough. He'd look at the stars and heal the scars that had haunted him most of his life. The loss of a son at the end of a gun and the death of his beautiful wife. But then one night when the sky was bright and the stars shone vivid and clean, something occurred so strange and absurd it changed old Mangus McGreen. Now he'd just out to smoke when the sky awoke with a boom and a shudder and flash that lit up the night, and he rubbed his eyes as his home became covered in ash. When the air finally cleared, he dusted his beard and grabbed for his sawed-off gun. and loaded two in the beast and pointed it east and stood not looking to run. By an old dead tree where his family be in graves that he kept well attended was a smoldering pit, and by the size of it, something from above had descended. So he walked to the rim and looked within, and there in the rock and sand, glowing hideous green through smoke and steam, was a stone the size of his hand. Well, using his boot, he gave it a scoot and kicked it right out of its nest, where it plunked on the ground, still green and round. And from where? He had already guessed. You're an alien scout, and I have no doubt you've picked the wrong place to land, because I'm meaner than spit, and I'll admit I'm dumb as a stump and damned. Then gun barrels blazed, and looking amazed, he saw it had hardly been scratched. He was a bit surprised, so narrowed his eyes and said, so it's gonna be like that. So he kicked that rock right into his shop, where his boot striking hard and quick, where a forge in the night glowed orange and bright. So he pumped up the bellows and spit. This is the end, my alien friend, and that forge roared mighty and hot. With gloves and with tongs and gloved hands, he continued his plan and grabbed for that stone and got that thing in the heat, and with a hammer he beat that stone with a fierceness and force till it shattered and cracked, and with further attacks he turned it to dust, and of course he scattered that dust in the forge, and thus was free from that alien stone. And the last gassy shreds of that stone were dead, and he walked to his house alone. Now while en route he looked to his boot and noticed a smoldering hole. Where he'd kicked at the rock, there was a hole that burned to his sock, and his toe felt a tingle and cold. Well, you scored one there. I guess that's fair, he said as he readied for bed. As he turned out the light, the world seemed right, for that alien thing was dead. Well, he woke with the sun, and when he was done with breakfast of bacon and beans, he looked to his toe, and it was swollen as though he'd been stung by a scorpion sting. Well, a few hours on, the swelling was gone, but then it turned horribly green. And later a pain had shot to his brain, and then something he'd never seen. That toe seemed alive. It would wriggle and writhe and sprouted a tentacled root. Damn that stone, he said with a groan. I shouldn't have used my boot. But I've lost an ear and 3 fingers, you hear? My kneecap, my rib, and my spleen. My spine's been fused, and I am not amused. I'm vengeful, vindictive, and mean. So be ready, son, I'm not using my gun. Then he reached for his hatchet and gin. I've said my goodbyes, but I'm not ready to die. And he hacked off his toe with a grin. Well, it rolled on the floor, but then to his horror, it wriggled and started to crawl. And that little green root attached to his boot. Now I'm certain I've seen it all. Without further delay, he said, I'll say you're a worthy opponent, old rock. Then he burned that old boot with that rock, with that toe in that root. And for safety, he threw in the sock. Now, a few years, sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay. Years later, they say he moved away to the city and found a new wife. And Mangus McGreen stopped being so mean and lived a quite regular life. He was gentle and kind, and others would find he was happy and generous too. They say he never swore, and he always wore steel-toed boots and shoes. So that's the whole story, be it ever so gory, but a truth to be told, every one of us owe a debt to McGreen, for when ornery and mean, he defeated that alien fungus.
Woohoo! Wow.
You know, with a name like Mangus McGreen, almost gives away it's going to be about toe fungus.
Oh,
I mean, when I heard that name, I should have guessed. It's going to be about toe fungus, of course.
Oh, thank you for indulging me. It's
man, that was incredible.
It's grand.
Incredible. He switched from the debate to getting on, I don't know, less than 5 minutes ago. And I mean, that was fantastic. Just marvelous. Just marvelous.
Thank you.
Have you
I
performed it?
vote for Lance.
That is the, I have read it, but that is, you were the first people that I have tried reciting it for. And And I'm sorry I stumbled, but that's the closest I've gotten. I haven't spent a lot of time memorizing and I've been a little busy, but thank you for tolerating my stumbles. But yeah, you guys are the first to hear it recited. So
Wonderful, wonderful.
thank you.
Really
Cone
good.
and a fungus, done right.
We're all in awe. We're all in awe.
Yeah.
Grand.
Yes. So
Thank
let's
you.
take a little literally 1 minute stretch break right now. So, stand up, go get yourself a glass of water if you need one, and come back in 1 minute. Let's see. I'm going to do it myself.
What?
All right. Welcome back, everybody. And we have another wonderful storyteller for you, Linda Wright. We're so glad to see you, Linda. Please tell us a story.
Do you remember a time when you were 8 or 9 years old and you were alone for the first time? No one was in your house and it was nighttime. Well, I'm going to tell you about a girl who's about 10, 11 years old, and she lives in East Africa. And she's alone at night in a haunted savannah. Listen to her story. I am a Mali, and my name means hope in Swahili. Every morning, my tribe, the women and us young girls, we get up and we put our water jugs on top of our head and we search for water. But there's very little of it because the savannah that we live by is haunted. And whatever is on that savannah has made the sky hard and the ground even harder. We have lost all of our livestock. We had to eat it. Our chickens and our rooster, our crops have failed. We survive on locusts and ants. And sometimes my mommy, she roasts mice. I know that doesn't seem to be right, but when you have to survive, that's what we eat. Every night, I have dreams. I have dreams that our ancestors are calling to me. They're saying, Amali, Amali, go across the Hanja Savannah to your sister Tambuki's house, and she will help you and your tribe survive. You must go at the next full moon, and we will be with you. Every morning I wake up and I tell my mother what they say, and she says, no. But on this particular morning, I tell her, and she goes, and all the beads around her neck and the beads around her arm and her wrist and her ankles, they're red and green and yellow. They just move and shake as she says no. But then she says, we will go and consult the elders. We walk together to the mango tree, and underneath the mango tree is where the elders sit, and they make decisions about everything that's important in our village. Oh, and as my mother talks to them about what I want to do, ooh, ah, ee, ah, ooh, ee, ah, ooh, ooh, is what they say. But one, Chief Lindsay, he stands up and says, Amali, when you were just teeny tiny, men came from across the savannah and they told us that they felt an evil presence out in the savannah, something that was watching them. And they hurried through and came here and they stayed with us for a long time. One of those men fell in love with your sister Tambuki, and she loved him back. When they departed from here, she went with them. Several months afterwards, we heard loud noises coming from the savannah. We sent men to investigate, and what they saw was something that was covered with cloud and dust that was changing the face of the savannah. Some huge creature was moving rocks and making mountains and valleys and canyons where a savannah is supposed to be flat. And then we sent more men to investigate, your father and your brothers, and they never came back. We sent more, sometimes some make it back, but we called them the living dead. Amali, I see 3 creatures. Do not give in to their demands. Whatever they want, do not agree to them. One has red hot eyes like fire. The second one, eyes are green and large, very huge. There's cruelty behind those eyes, misery too, and sweetness as well. And the third one has yellow eyes, eyes as yellow as corn. Like I said, do not give in to their demands. I cannot see anymore. Amali, perhaps because of your youth and your innocence, you will survive in the way that our men have not been able to. We give you our blessing. No! My mother yelled. And I go, yes, yes. And that night, right before we are to leave, I am to leave our village, they all gather around me. They give me their blessing. And as the moon is rising, orange and red, I step out onto that savannah. And I realize as I'm walking that I am alone. There is no one around me. Oh, something touches me. The wings of a vulture. Oh, there's vultures up ahead of me, above me. That is not a good sign. As I continue to walk, there's rocks in front of me. There's red eyes just glowing in the darkness above there, and red teeth, and they're coming down and just floating down. And I hear a voice saying, Chakula, 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 food. And I jump back. But those eyeballs and those teeth belong to a man with woolly hair, and around his neck is green mamba snakes just writhing and twirling around him. And I'm like, oh no, stay away from me. But by his side, he has a sack tied onto his side, and it's an old, smelly old sack. And he opens it up and he pulls out a hand. And on top of that hand, there's tuft of hair, and then there's 5 red eyeballs and a little mouth where the wrist is. And he says to that hand, Mommy, Mommy, my child bride is here. And she looks at me and says, ooh, she is very beautiful. Oh, Chief Badman, my dear son, you ought to marry her right away. I will. And he puts her back in that sack and he looks at me, oh, and he touches my neck, oh, and my pulse. And he touches my neck so hard and he makes my blood begin to come out. And I'm like, oh, stay away from me. But I look at that sack, that bony sack filled with bones. And I say, Chief Badman, I am a bag of bones. Look at me. I'm so thin and I'm so skinny. I'm on my way to my sister's house and she's going to feed me ugali and groundnuts, ugali and plantains, ugali and beans. And when I come back through here, after eating all that ugali, that corn porridge, I'll be fat and round and juicy and firm. And then I could be your child bride. And he says, Zuri, good, you will be my wife. I will let you go. I will wait here. And he opens up that sack and says, Mommy, she's going away for a little bit to get ready for our wedding. And she closes it back up and he puts it down. And I'm like, oh, I gotta get out of here. And I back away and I walk and I'm walking and walking and I'm running. And then some green mamba snakes come right in front of me. Your mirth's gone back immediately when you get firm and juicy or else. And then they disappear in a cloud of smoke. I continue on my way, not knowing what would happen when I see the next creature. And that is the end of my tale for tonight.
Wow, a cliffhanger. All right.
Lovely story, Linda. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Jean.
Well, you got to come back next month and tell us what happens next. Thank you, Linda. All right. Our next storyteller is Claire Castell. Welcome, Claire. Tell us a story. You need to unmute. Claire says her story is called Halloween and the Duck Man.
All right, unmute myself. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, this story is true. It is 90% true. And it's a nice little Halloween story. So everybody agrees Halloween is just for kids, right? No, we all adults love Halloween. We love to dress up in some sexy female pirate costume or some scary monster costume and be somebody else for a night. And in my neighborhood, adults go all out. I mean, the houses are decorated, but you can tell the houses where there are no kids, they go way, way out. When I moved to this house, my next door neighbor was the minister, the assistant minister for the Greek Orthodox Church. And he was crazy for holiday decorations. And Halloween was one of his best, giant pumpkins and spooky ghosts and monsters. It was silly, but it was fun. Now, a few years ago, when I retired, I started taking a daily walk of 2 miles every morning. And so I really got to see up close some of these houses that they really go all out for decorations. And again, not just for kids. One of them is this gay couple. They put on their spiders on pulleys and they have wires that rats go down and they project Boris Karloff movies on their front window. I mean, it's just wonderful. But my favorite scary house was the one that was done by the Duck Man. Now, he had a lot of decorations, skulls, and he had groans and moans coming from inside the house. But the scariest thing, the thing that scared the shit out of me, was up on his roof on an old antenna was a demon horseman, like the apocalypse. And he had black rags, and he was hooded, looked like he was carrying something, and he was on a horse. And it just scared the shit out of me. It was just amazing. He was my favorite one. Now, the reason he was called the Duck Man is because he kept pet ducks. In his front yard, he had 4 pet ducks who were trained to stay there. They never flew off, they never walked off. Those ducks were there every day. He told me he had a bunch of ducks in the back, but I would take my walk every day, and I really looked forward to hearing the little quack, 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 quacks. And the ducks had a little swimming pool, and I named them. There was Donald, Quackers, Peggy Sue, and Dave. And that was just a really special part of my daily walk. And I talked to the duck man, and he says, you know, those ducks, they just love to eat. I give them lettuce, cabbage, and the wife says I need to give them kale, but I don't like the kale, and they don't like the kale. One day, Duck Man confessed that he was very sick. He didn't say what it was, but I think it was cancer. He looked okay, but you never know. So last year, late summer, I noticed the ducks were not outside. I go around 8:30 in the morning. So I thought, well, maybe he's just letting them out later in the day. So I started coming around 11:30, but I didn't see him for weeks. I saw one of his neighbors out gardening, and I asked about the old man. He said, oh, I'm sorry, the old man died. Oh, I was just heartbroken. He was a sweet old guy. And I kept walking by in case I thought maybe his wife would let the ducks out. And then I saw her one day. She was putting out men's clothes on the curb for giveaway, you know, like they do in neighborhoods. And I went up to her and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I hear your husband passed. And she says, it was his own damn fault. He never took care of himself. He deserved what he got. I can't have any time for these stupid ducks. I'm going to get rid of him. And she just went on and on. Whew. I felt bad that the duck man had such a mean wife. And then the last days of his life, he had to put up with that. I mean, how bad can a man be if he has ducks? I kept passing the house and hoping I would hear little quacks from Peggy Sue or Dave, but I didn't. Well, the following Halloween, I walk around in the evening to enjoy all the decorated houses. And my friend Patrice lives across the street from the gay couple who puts on that beautiful show. So I go down there and we stand and have a couple of drinks of wine, watch the show. And I decide to walk by the duck man's house on the way home. You know, a lot of the decorations had been taken down. Most of them have been taken down since he died. I didn't know what I expected. The wife didn't really seem to have a sense of fun at all. But when I get there, I see that horseman, that demon horseman on the roof, on that antenna, riding a horse, and it black rags. And it's really rocking and moving, which would be fine, but it was no wind at all. I didn't really understand that. And I didn't really remember seeing those gleaming orange eyes. And then I think, now maybe I had too much wine with Patrice, but I think I saw him turn and look down at me. And then I heard the sound. It was at first quiet. Then I recognized it. Quack, 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 quack. The duck man was back. That's it.
Thank you, Claire. The spooky in our real world. All right, thank you so much. I don't know what Halloween is gonna be like this year, huh? Yeah, yeah. Our next storyteller is Andre Wilson. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a peculiar such thing from the book of African American folk tales by Virginia Hamilton. A long time ago, way back in the piney woods, there lived a fella all alone in a log cabin. He cooked his supper in the fireplace every night. One night, after he had finished cooking and eating, he saw the most peculiar thing he ever saw crawl through the cracks between the logs of his cabin. It had a great, big, long tail. And he saw that peculiar thing with the great, big, long tail. He took an axe off the wall and chopped off the great, big, long tail of this most peculiar such thing that crawled back through the crack in the cabin and escaped. Well, this fella wasn't too bright. He took that great, big, long tail, plopped it in the pot, cooked it, and ate it all up. It was sweet and tender. He went to bed and to sleep. But later that night, he was awakened by this scratching sound and rattling on his door. And he felt this scrabbling as if something big and heavy was crawling the outside walls of his cabin. And he heard a voice whisper, Telipo, Telipo, give me back my Telipo. Now this fella, he didn't live in the cabin all by himself. He had 3 dogs. The biggest one was named Best, the mid-sized one was named All Right, and the smallest one was named Fair. So he called his dogs, You Best, you All Right, you Fair, sick 'em. And the dogs went running from beneath the cabin. And they chased that peculiar such thing all past the gate and out of the yard. Well, that fella went back to bed and to sleep. But later in the night, past midnight, he heard that scratching sound again. And something trying to open the door. Then he heard this scrambling, scratching sound as something big and heavy crawled the outside wall of the cabin. And he heard a voice say, Telipo, Telipo, give me back my Telipo. The fellow called for his dogs again. You best, you all right, you fair, sick 'em. And those dogs went running from beneath the cabin, and they chased that peculiar such thing all out of the yard and just about broke their own tails off, chasing it all the way down to the holler. The man went back to bed and to sleep. But halfway to morning, he heard way down in the swamp a voice say, I know you got it. I know you know. Give me back my telephone. The fellow heard that echo come through the swamp, and he called his dogs. You best, you all right, you fair, sick 'em. But the dogs did not answer. And he heard the voice of the peculiar such thing way out in the swamp say, that one was best. The mid-sized one was all right. And the other puny one was Don't know how the man did it, but he went back to bed and to sleep. It was close to dawn. The rays of the sun would begin to come from beyond the horizon. When the man woke by the presence that there was something in the cabin with him. And he looked down past his blankets and he saw these two pointy ears stick up from the edge of his bed. And then the most peculiar such thing raised its head above the edge of his bed. And it had great, big, red eyes and long, sharp teeth. And it began to crawl and crawl onto the bed and up the blankets until it was finally on top of his chest. And it said, Telepo, Telepo, give me back my Telepo. And the man, he was shivering under the blankets, and he lost his breath. He couldn't say anything. And finally he said, I hasn't got it. I hasn't got your telepo. And the most peculiar such thing says, yes, you has. And then pounced on the man and tore him to ribbons with his claws and his fangs. And they say the most peculiar such thing got his telepo back. The fellow's empty cabin fell to ruins and rotted away, leaving nothing behind but the standing chimney, the foundation, the rusted axe, and the rusted pot. But the people who live near that cabin say that on long winter nights, when the moon is bright and the wind blows just right through the ruins of that cabin, people can hear the voice of the peculiar such thing calling, Telepo, teleport. And then the voice faded away with the moonlight, as if it never, ever was.
Whoa. Woo! Wow. Thank you so much, Andre. That was
Welcome, thank you. Thank you.
Andre is the master of the Zoom camera. And that story just, I mean, it was the perfect story for that. Really.
Thank you.
Well, that was really scary. I mean, if you know, I think so. Before we wrap up, I'll tell one more story. To kind of, for some of us who get scared easily, maybe bring your heartbeat down a little bit. And it's actually what I love about folklore is how you can have the same story pretty much in the southern United States and in England and in other countries with different clothes on. And this one particular one is in a very different tone as well. And it's called The Teeny Tiny Woman. And some of you may know it. If you know it, I hope you enjoy hearing it again. Once there was a teeny tiny woman. She lived in a teeny tiny house in a teeny tiny village. And one day she decided to take a teeny tiny walk. So she went out her teeny tiny house, opened the teeny tiny gate, and went onto the teeny tiny path that went from her house towards the village. And as she went on her teeny tiny walk on the teeny tiny path, she passed a teeny tiny graveyard. And when she looked into the graveyard, she saw that on a teeny tiny gravestone, there was a teeny tiny bone. And she thought to herself, that teeny tiny bone would make a really good soup for my teeny tiny supper. So she took the teeny tiny bone and she put it in her teeny tiny pocket, and she finished her walk and she went back to her teeny tiny house. But when she got back to her teeny tiny house, the teeny tiny woman was just a teeny tiny bit too tired to make supper. You know how that feels. And so she decided that she would just go up her teeny tiny stairs to go to bed. But before she went up, she put the teeny tiny bone in a teeny tiny cupboard to save it for the next day. Then she went up the teeny tiny stairs and got into her teeny tiny bed and pulled the teeny tiny covers up to her teeny tiny chin and went to sleep. But she hadn't been asleep more than a teeny tiny time when she heard a teeny tiny voice coming from downstairs. And the teeny tiny voice said, "Give me my bone." Now the teeny tiny woman was a teeny tiny bit disturbed. But she got up and looked around her teeny tiny house and she didn't see anyone. So she got back into her teeny tiny bed and went to sleep again. But she hadn't been asleep more than a teeny tiny bit longer when she heard that voice again, but it was not quite as teeny, not quite as tiny, and a little teeny tiny bit closer. And it was saying, "Give me my bone." And if you want to help me make that voice a little louder, you can. So she still didn't see anyone. She pulled those teeny tiny covers right up over her teeny tiny head, though, because she really was a teeny tiny bit frightened. But she fell asleep. But you know what happened? After not too much of a teeny tiny bit of time, that voice came back. But it was more than a teeny tiny bit closer, and it was more than a teeny tiny bit louder. And that voice was saying, "Give me my bone." And so the teeny tiny woman pulled the teeny tiny covers down and peeked her teeny tiny head out. And her loudest teeny tiny voice, she said, "It's in the cupboard, get it yourself." And that's the story of the teeny tiny woman. Now, if everybody, yeah. So that was, thank you all for a wonderful evening of stories. Thank you for coming. Stories are what keep us together. There are things though that take us apart from each other, and I need to share some sad news that some of you know and some of you don't. But Dale Allen Boland, who was our featured teller in July, she passed away on Tuesday night, and we are heartbroken and very sad. He's such a special soul. I first met Dale at a Halloween, and Jean Allison, you were there, right? You may have met Dale before, but for kids in Orinda, I think it was, and excuse me, and Dale had been ill, but she became much more ill quite recently, quite quickly, and passed peacefully on Tuesday. And so I wanted everybody to know that and how much we are going to miss her. We are going to, this is the end of our evening normally to say goodnight, but I just want to say that we can, in a minute, we'll end our recording, but anybody who wants to leave, of course, please do. But if you knew Dale and you want to stay on and we want to share some memories and talk, we'll do that for a few minutes. So before we do that, let's have Sally come back on also to say our hostess was the mostest. Marnie, if you could spotlight Sally, that would be great, and say goodnight. And then, as I said, we can, anybody wants to stay, please stay.
Good night, everybody. Lovely. I don't know if it was lovely. It was haunted. I'll say a haunted evening of stories. So good to be with you. Have a good week ahead, and keep strong. Keep your stories going. And good night.
Night.
Thank you.